I got some news this week that can only be
Yeah.
described as a roller coaster of emotion.
Oh no.
Yeah. There is a fine line between comedy and tragedy,
Yes.
and my family in Liverpool straddle that line
Oh no.
quite regularly. To give you a bit of background, currently, I'm, shall we say, disconnected from my close family. My sister hates me, and in my mother's eyes, my sister can do no wrong. So we have nothing to do with each other or any of them, because anytime I've gone up there to have any time with either of them, I've ended up getting quite hurt, actually. So
No, that's
uh,
horrible.
so I'm not disconnected, to punish them or hurt them. I'm disconnected just to protect me, because it's not pleasant. Now, my dad died in June last year.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
He was cremated, and I didn't go to the funeral because I knew my sister was going to be there, and I didn't want anything to kick off. So all
Yeah.
the extended family would have been there, and there's really no words to describe the intensity of the hatred that my sister has for me, and I didn't want I didn't want that to be the focus of the funeral.
Yeah.
My dad and I didn't have what you would call a father-son relationship.
Yeah.
I never actually got the feeling that he even liked me, but
Oh.
that's a different thing.
Yeah.
Um, I never found him to be a particular role model. He was such a cheapskate. We
Really?
yeah, we weren't poor, but he
Yeah.
would not spend money. Like, well, something as basic as school shoes. Most kids had school shoes.
Yeah.
I had steel toe-capped work boots because he used to steal them from the site he worked on, and that's what schooling.
Oh God.
I know.
That's awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, he would know the price of every of the pint at every pub within a 10-mile radius, and how much cheaper it was in the club that he went to.
Yeah.
For my 40th birthday, we were living in Bournemouth at the time, and they came down to visit, and we went out for lunch at Frankie and Benny's, and he wouldn't order any food because the deal they were on in their hotel, they got a meal.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
anyway, anyway, but my extended family are lovely.
Mm.
And I've never felt anything other than love and support, and they're wonderful.
Mm.
And this week, I got an email from my favorite auntie, my mum's sister, my Auntie Hazel in Liverpool. And she emailed me to say that her brother, my Uncle Brian in Scotland, had died.
Oh no.
And I was really quite upset when I found out, because I really, really liked Uncle Brian. I mean, he
Yeah.
really was someone. I mean, he was an ex-Navy man. He was, generous, and I can remember playing football. He'd come down from Scotland every now and again. It was a real treat when he'd
Yeah.
show. I can remember playing football in the back garden with him when I was about 5. And it's funny, I have no memory of playing football in the back garden with my father.
No.
But Uncle Brian died, and and there were tears and all the rest of it. And it was good, because I realized that, I always wonder whether I'm normal. I think that's the number one question a lot of people ask themselves is, am I normal? And when I found out that my dad had died, once again, it was also my Auntie Hazel that told me that my dad had died last June. I felt nothing.
Yeah.
Like nothing.
No.
Not anger or release or sadness or happiness. There was nothing.
No.
And at the time I was like, wow, there's something wrong with me. Your father dies. You're supposed to feel something. Really worried. And I Googled it, and I found that kids who didn't have a proper relationship with their father, but always wanted one, you desperately want love and approval from your father,
Of course you do.
especially a boy.
Yeah.
It turns out that you've actually been mourning them your whole life. So when the moment comes that they die, you've done it. You've been through it.
Yeah.
And I spoke to Dom Jolly about it on the podcast radio interview I did, and he had a similar thing. He said that he'd mourned him for 10 years before. I think I'd mourned my dad for a lot longer than that. But so that made me feel okay. And then when I realized I was upset about Uncle Brian going, that okay, I'm normal, So that was a bit of relief there, that I'm not a Vulcan, There's so anyway.
None of us are normal, Graham.
Nobody's normal.
Nobody's normal. No.
So
such thing.
So nobody's normal. So anyway, it forced me to reply to my Auntie Hazel to thank her for telling me and to let her know that the message, I'd got the message. And I wrote some nice things about my Uncle Brian. When I was a kid, I was into space, and I remember he took me to Jodrell Bank to see the radio telescope. And a funny story is he lived on the island of Rothsay in Scotland, the Isle of Bute, Rothsay, Isle of Bute in Scotland. And he used to run a cafe on the front there. Everybody in the town knew him. And we were out, it was a day out. There's a main ferry, the Weems Bay ferry, but there's another ferry way out on the arse end of the island, I suppose. And it's very rural at this other ferry. And we were there, I think we'd only gone there just to see the ferry. We weren't getting on it. We'd come across it. Anyway, so we're waiting there, and it's a rural Scottish island.
Yeah.
And there's a bloke rides up on a horse. I mean, this huge, beautiful brown horse. And I don't know, it was probably going on the ferry, the horse. I don't know.
Yeah.
Bloke rides up on a horse. And I'm standing there with Brian. And this other bloke starts walking towards us. And Brian says to me, he says, this boy here, he's a really, really, really nice man. He said, but he's a bit simple. He's touched, but he's a lovely fella. But I just thought I'd let you know. And I'm, okay. And I'm like, 12 years old at this, but he's letting me in. This bloke comes up and he says, hi, Brian, how you doing? You all right? And then he's like, oh, yeah, fine. He says, that's a fine looking horse, that's a beautiful horse. What breed of horse would that be, Brian? And without trying to be funny, with a total straight face, he turns to him and he goes, I think that would be that's your red setter. And this fella goes, a red setter, is that a fact? Oh, well, it's a fine looking red setter, so it is. And I always wondered whether this fella had, later that day had been in his local pub or something, and he'd be talking to people and they know he's a bit that way.
Yeah.
And he would have said, I was at the ferry today and a bloke rode by on a red setter. but anyway, that was Brian. Anyway, so now I've opened a dialogue with my Auntie Hazel, my mum's sister, and Brian was her brother, so I've opened this dialogue. She replied to my email with some details of what's been going on with my mum and my sister, because I'm disconnected from them.
Yeah.
And this sentence in particular, have I got it? Yeah, this sentence in particular jumped out. She says, your dad is still on the shelf at the undertaker's because no one has paid the bill for the funeral.
What?
Like I said, fine line between tragedy and comedy.
Yes.
Now, my first thoughts were, oh, for goodness sake, between my mum and my sister, you had the funeral. He's been cremated. For goodness sake, pay the bloody bill, right? Yeah. My first emotion was, for goodness sake.
Yes.
Frustration. He died it's nearly a year.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Oh
And
dear.
then, so this was last night I got this. So it was, I go to bed and Julie said, I said, you won't believe this. And Julie put it into perspective perfectly. She said, well, it's what he would have wanted. He would have been so proud because he was such a cheap bugger to think that he got a free funeral
Free
at the very
funeral, yeah.
end. You know,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
these people who are always late, and you say, I bet they'll be late for their own funeral.
Yeah.
He was always cheap, and I bet he ended up having a funeral that doesn't get. He actually wouldn't care that he's on the shelf, and he'd be more bothered that somebody paid for it.